The dust-laden sun cast long shadows across Timber Creek as Abigail Rawlins stepped off the eastbound train, her 5-year-old son clutching her hand with a grip that betrayed his nervousness. 8 years had passed since she'd last set foot in this frontier town, and the weight of those years and the secrets they held pressed down on her shoulders like the heavy carpet bag she carried in her free hand. "Is this where Pa lives, Mama?" the boy asked, his voice barely audible above the hissing steam of the locomotive. Abigail's heart clenched. "This is where I grew up, Samuel," she answered, carefully avoiding his question as her eyes scanned the weathered buildings of Main Street. Timber Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1878. It looked both exactly the same and entirely different from the place she'd fled as a heartbroken girl of 19. The journey from Boston had been long, nearly unbearable at times, but after her parents' passing, she had nowhere else to go. The small inheritance they'd left her wasn't enough to maintain their modest home, and the thought of raising Samuel alone in the city had become increasingly daunting. Timber Creek was her only option, even if it meant facing the man she'd left behind. "Come along, Samuel," she said, adjusting her bonnet against the late June sun. "We need to find a place to stay tonight." Samuel nodded solemnly, his dark hair so like his father's falling across his forehead. He was an unusually serious child, more observer than participant, with eyes that seemed to take in everything. Those eyes, too, were a painful reminder of what Abigail had left behind. The Silver Dollar Hotel stood much as Abigail remembered it, though the sign now hung crooked and the white paint had yellowed with age. Inside, the proprietress, Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman with graying hair pinned severely atop her head, looked up from her ledger as they entered. "Good afternoon," Abigail said. "I'd like a room, please, for myself and my son." Mrs. Holloway studied her for a long moment. "You look familiar, miss. Have you stayed with us before, a long time ago?" "I'm Abigail Rawlins. I grew up here." Recognition dawned in the older woman's eyes. "Little Abby Rawlins. Well, I never. Everyone thought you'd gone east for good, and now you're back with—" Her gaze dropped to Samuel, who had partially hidden himself behind his mother's skirts. "My son, Samuel," Abigail said, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "We've come back to Timber Creek to make a new start." Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly, and Abigail could almost see the calculations happening behind them. Samuel's age, the years since Abigail had left, the lack of a wedding ring on her finger. "Well," the older woman said finally, "it's $2 a night, includes breakfast. How long will you be staying?" "I'm not sure yet. A few days at least, until I can make more permanent arrangements." As Mrs. Holloway handed over a key, the front door of the hotel swung open, bringing with it a gust of warm air and the unmistakable scent of leather and horses. Abigail froze, not daring to turn around. "Afternoon, Mrs. Holloway," came a deep, familiar voice that sent a shock through Abigail's entire body. "Just checking if that package from Denver came in yet." "Not yet, Mr. Jackson," Mrs. Holloway replied, her eyes darting between Abigail and the newcomer. "But we do have a new guest you might remember. Abigail Rawlins has returned to Timber Creek." Abigail took a steadying breath and turned slowly. There, standing in the doorway with the son at his back, was Flynn Jackson. 8 years had changed him. His face was more weathered, new lines around his eyes, his shoulders broader beneath his worn leather vest. But his eyes were the same deep blue she remembered, now wide with shock as he stared at her. "Abby," he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Flynn," she managed to say, her mouth suddenly dry. His gaze moved from her face down to Samuel, who had stepped out from behind her skirts, curious about the newcomer. For a long moment, Flynn just stared at the boy, an unreadable expression on his face. "This is my son, Samuel," Abigail said, her voice carefully neutral. "Samuel, this is Mr. Jackson. He's an old friend of mine." Samuel, ever polite, extended his small hand. "Pleased to meet you, sir." Flynn swallowed hard and knelt down to the boy's level, taking his hand in a gentle shake. "Pleased to meet you too, young man," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to Timber Creek." Their eyes met the same shade of blue, the same thoughtful gaze, and Abigail felt her heart constrict. Flynn looked up at her, questions burning in his eyes, but before he could speak, the hotel door opened again and a woman entered. "Flynn, are you coming?" The wagons loaded and the woman stopped short at the tableau before her. She was pretty, with honey blonde hair and a practical calico dress. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt." Flynn stood quickly, something like guilt crossing his face. "Abby, this is Annie Thornton. She runs the general store with her father." He hesitated. "Annie, this is Abigail Rawlins. She used to live here." Annie smiled warmly. "Nice to meet you, Miss Rawlins. Are you visiting family?" "No," Abigail said. "My parents have passed. I've come back to." What did she come back for? She wasn't entirely sure herself. "To start over," she finished lamely. "Well, Timber Creek's a good place for that," Annie said, then glanced at Flynn. "We should get going if we want to make it to the Johnson place before dark." Flynn nodded, his eyes still fixed on Abigail and Samuel. "Right, we should." He cleared his throat. "It's good to see you, Abby. Maybe we could talk sometime. Catch up." "Perhaps," Abigail said, though she wasn't sure what they could possibly say to each other after all this time, after what had happened. Flynn tipped his hat, gave Samuel one more long look, and followed Annie out of the hotel. Through the window, Abigail watched as they climbed into a wagon loaded with supplies, Flynn taking the reins. There was an easy familiarity between them that made something twist painfully in her chest. Mrs. Holloway clucked her tongue. "Well, that was interesting," she said. "Room 3, top of the stairs. Supper's at 6 if you want it." Abigail thanked her and led Samuel upstairs, her mind reeling. She'd known she would see Flynn eventually. Timber Creek wasn't big enough to avoid him, but she hadn't expected it to happen within minutes of her arrival. And she certainly hadn't expected to see him with another woman. "Mama," Samuel asked as she unlocked their room door. "Why did that man look at me like that?" Abigail set down their bags and knelt before her son. "Like what, sweetheart? Like he was sad or scared? Or both?" She brushed his dark hair from his forehead, buying time. How could she explain what she herself didn't fully understand? "Mr. Jackson was a good friend of mine when I lived here before. He was probably just surprised to see me after so long." Samuel considered this, then nodded, accepting her explanation with the trust of childhood. But Abigail knew that trust wouldn't last forever. Sooner or later, she would have to tell Samuel the truth, and Flynn as well. The question was whether any of them were ready for it. The next morning, Abigail woke early, her mind made up. She couldn't hide in the hotel forever, and putting off the inevitable would only make things harder. After breakfast, she and Samuel would go to Flynn's ranch and have the conversation she should have had 8 years ago. Samuel picked at his porridge, unusually quiet even for him. "What's wrong, darling?" Abigail asked, concerned. "I miss Grandma and Grandpa," he said softly, "and our house in Boston." Abigail's heart ached for him. So much change in such a short time for such a young child. "I know, sweetheart. I miss them too. But we'll make a good life here, I promise." "Will we live in this hotel forever?" She smiled at that. "No, not forever. We'll find a proper home soon." After breakfast, Abigail hired a buggy from the livery stable, and with directions from the stable hand, set out for Flynn's ranch. "Samuel," excited by the prospect of a ride into the countryside, bombarded her with questions about the wildlife they might see. Flynn's ranch lay about 3 miles outside of town, in a sheltered valley with a creek running through it. As they approached, Abigail could see it was prospering. Fenced pastures held healthy cattle, outbuildings stood in good repair, and the main house, though modest, was solid and well maintained. Flynn had done well for himself in the years since she'd left. A dog barked as they pulled up to the house, and a moment later, Flynn himself emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. He stopped dead when he recognized the buggy's occupants. Abigail set the brake and climbed down, helping Samuel after her. "Good morning, Flynn," she called, her voice steadier than she felt. Flynn approached slowly, his expression guarded. "Abby, this is a surprise." "I thought we should talk," she said, then glanced at Samuel. "Is there somewhere Samuel could play while we do? It's not a conversation for young ears." Flynn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "There's a swing by the side of the house. My foreman's wife could keep an eye on him." Once Samuel was happily swinging under the watchful eye of Mrs. Baxter, a kindly woman in her 50s, Flynn led Abigail to the porch. They sat in rocking chairs, an awkward silence between them. "You've done well for yourself," Abigail said finally, gesturing to the ranch. "It's been a lot of work," Flynn said, his voice neutral. "But yes, the ranch is doing well." Another silence, heavier this time. "Abby," Flynn began, just as Abigail said, "Flynn, they both stopped, and despite everything, a small smile tugged at Abigail's lips. "You go first," she said. Flynn leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why did you come back, Abby? After all this time, why now?" "My parents died," she said simply. "Influenza this past winter. There was nothing left for us in Boston. I'm sorry about your parents. They were good people." Flynn's gaze drifted to Samuel, visible around the corner of the house. "He's mine, isn't he?" Abigail's breath caught. She'd expected to have to tell him, not to have him ask so directly. "Yes," she whispered. "He's yours." Flynn closed his eyes briefly, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. "I knew it the moment I saw him. He has my mother's chin." "And your eyes," Abigail added softly. "Your thoughtfulness, too." Flynn looked at her, hurt and anger warring in his expression. "Why didn't you tell me, Abby? All these years, I had a right to know." "I know," she admitted. "And I've regretted not telling you every day since he was born, but when I left, I was so hurt, so angry. I thought you'd chosen the ranch over me, over us." "I asked you to wait," Flynn said, his voice tight. "Just 1 year while I got the ranch established. You were the one who couldn't accept that." "I was young and foolish," Abigail conceded. "When my aunt invited me to Boston, it seemed like the perfect escape. I didn't know I was expecting Samuel when I left, by the time I found out." She trailed off, remembering her fear and confusion in those early days in Boston. "I convinced myself you wouldn't want us, that you'd made your choice clear when you chose the ranch over our plans to marry." Flynn stood abruptly, pacing the porch. "So instead you kept my son from me for 5 years. Do you have any idea what that feels like, Abby? To know you have a child out there who doesn't even know you exist." "I'm sorry," she said, tears filling her eyes. "I truly am. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but that's why I'm here now. Samuel deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know your son." Flynn stopped pacing and looked at her, his anger softening slightly at her tears. "Does he know? About me?" She shook her head. "No, I've told him his father was a good man who couldn't be with us, but nothing specific. I wanted to talk to you first to see if you wanted to be part of his life." "Of course I want to be part of his life," Flynn said, his voice breaking. "He's my son." A wave of relief washed over Abigail. Despite everything, she'd feared Flynn might reject Samuel, might refuse to acknowledge him as his own. "Thank you," she whispered. Flynn ran a hand through his hair. "What happens now? Where will you live? What will you tell him?" "I don't know yet," Abigail admitted. "I need to find work, a place to live. As for telling Samuel—" She looked toward her son, who was now exploring the garden under Mrs. Baxter's supervision. "I think we should do it together when the time is right." Flynn nodded slowly. "There's a vacant teacher's position at the school. With your education, you'd be qualified." Abigail looked at him in surprise. "How did you know about my education?" A ghost of a smile crossed Flynn's face. "Your parents wrote to me the first couple of years after you left. They mentioned you were taking courses at a women's college. They never told me they wrote to you. I asked them not to tell you. I thought you needed your freedom from this place, from me." The thought that Flynn had remained connected to her parents, had cared enough to inquire about her life, touched something deep inside Abigail. "I'll inquire about the teaching position," she said. "Thank you." A silence fell between them again, but it was different this time, less tense, more thoughtful. "What about Miss Thornton?" Abigail asked finally, trying to keep her voice casual. "Are you and she—" Flynn looked surprised. "Annie, no, we're just friends. She's engaged to a rancher over in Pine Ridge." "Oh," Abigail said, feeling a ridiculous sense of relief. "I just thought yesterday at the hotel. We were delivering supplies to outlying farms," Flynn explained. "Nothing more." Before Abigail could respond, Samuel came running around the corner of the house, his face alight with excitement. "Mama, Mrs. Baxter showed me baby chickens." He stopped short when he saw Flynn, suddenly shy again. Flynn crouched down to Samuel's level. "Did you like the chickens?" Samuel nodded solemnly. "They were yellow and fuzzy. Would you like to see some other animals? I have horses and cows and even a new litter of kittens in the barn." Samuel looked to his mother for permission. When she nodded, his face broke into a rare, wide smile. "Yes, please." Flynn held out his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Samuel took it. Something shifted in Flynn's expression as his son's small hand settled in his own, a look of wonder and fierce protectiveness that made Abigail's heart ache. As they walked toward the barn, Abigail followed a few paces behind, watching father and son together for the first time. Flynn was pointing things out to Samuel, answering the boy's questions with patience and genuine interest. Already, a bond was forming between them. In the barn, Flynn lifted Samuel up to see the nest of kittens tucked in the hayloft. "Be gentle," he instructed. "They're still very small." Samuel reached out a careful finger to stroke one of the kittens. "What are their names?" "They don't have names yet," Flynn said. "Would you like to help name them?" Samuel's eyes widened. "Can I really?" "Of course. Let's see, there are 5 of them. What should we call this orange one?" As Samuel considered this important question, Abigail leaned against a post, watching them. This was what she had denied both of them for 5 years, this simple joy of father and son together. The guilt of it weighed heavily on her, but seeing them now, she knew she'd made the right decision in coming back. "Rusty," Samuel decided, "because he's the color of rusty nails." Flynn smiled. "Rusty it is." They named all 5 kittens, then moved on to see the horses. Samuel was particularly taken with a gentle bay mare named Daisy. "Can I pet her?" he asked Flynn. "You can do better than that," Flynn said. "Would you like to sit on her?" Samuel nodded eagerly, and Flynn lifted him up onto the mare's back, keeping a steadying hand on him. "Hold onto her mane like this," he instructed, showing Samuel how to grasp the horse's mane without pulling. "I'm riding a horse, Mama," Samuel called, his face alight with joy. "Look at me." "I see you, darling," Abigail called back, smiling at his excitement. "You're doing wonderfully." Flynn led the mare around the corral in a slow circle, one hand on Samuel, the other on the lead rope. He was talking to the boy the whole time, explaining how to sit properly, how to communicate with the horse. Samuel hung on his every word. "You're a natural," Flynn told him as he lifted him down after a few circuits. "Just like he caught himself, glancing at Abigail. "Like my what?" Samuel asked. Flynn cleared his throat. "Like a real cowboy." Samuel beamed at the compliment. "Could I ride her again sometime?" "Anytime you want," Flynn promised. In fact, he hesitated, looking to Abigail for permission. "Maybe you and your mother could come for dinner tomorrow. I could show you more of the ranch." "Can we, Mama?" Samuel asked, turning to Abigail with pleading eyes. How could she refuse when both of them looked at her like that? "Yes, we'd like that very much." Flynn's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Good, that's good." By the time they left the ranch that afternoon, Samuel was full of stories about the animals he'd seen and the things Flynn had taught him. "Mr. Jackson said I could help feed the chickens next time," he told Abigail as they drove back to town. "And he's going to show me how to milk a cow." "It sounds like you had a wonderful time," Abigail said, pleased to see her normally reserved son so animated. "I like Mr. Jackson," Samuel said decisively. "He doesn't talk to me like I'm a baby." "No, he wouldn't," Abigail agreed. Flynn had always had a knack for treating people with respect, regardless of their age or station. It was one of the things she'd loved about him. Loved. The word echoed in her mind. Did she still love Flynn Jackson? Or was it just the memory of love she clung to? She wasn't sure. So much had happened. So much time had passed. They were different people now. And yet, watching him with Samuel today, seeing his kindness and patience, the gentle way he'd guided their son, something had stirred in her heart that she thought long dead. The next day, Abigail visited the school board chairman and secured the teaching position for the fall term. She also arranged to rent a small house on the edge of town, nothing fancy, but clean and sturdy, with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen garden out back. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt a sense of stability, of possibility. That evening, she dressed with particular care for dinner at Flynn's ranch, selecting a blue dress that she knew brought out the color of her eyes. Samuel, too, was excited, wearing his best shirt and asking every few minutes if it was time to go yet. Flynn met them at the door, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. "Welcome," he said, a touch of nervousness in his smile. "Come in." The inside of the ranch house was simply but comfortably furnished, with a stone fireplace dominating the main room. The table was set for 3, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. "Mrs. Baxter helped me with dinner," Flynn admitted as he took their coats. "I'm not much of a cook on my own." "It smells wonderful," Abigail assured him. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Flynn had made a special effort for Samuel, preparing all the foods a 5-year-old boy might enjoy: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh corn. Samuel ate with enthusiasm, chattering about the town, his new bedroom, the stray dog he'd seen near the hotel. After dinner, Flynn showed them the rest of the house, including a room that made Abigail catch her breath, a small bedroom with a child-sized bed and a bookshelf filled with children's books. "I thought," Flynn said hesitantly, "for when Samuel visits, if that's all right." Abigail nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Flynn had prepared a room for his son, a place where Samuel would always be welcome. It was more than she dared hope for. Later, when Samuel had fallen asleep on the sofa, worn out from exploring and playing, Flynn and Abigail sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and pink. "I spoke to the school board today," Abigail said. "I start teaching in September." "That's good news," Flynn said. "The children will be lucky to have you. I also found a house to rent. It's small, but it will suit us fine." Flynn nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "I've been thinking, Abby, about Samuel, about how to tell him. And I think we should do it soon. He's smart, he's going to start noticing things, asking questions. Better he hears it from us than pieces it together on his own." Abigail sighed. "You're right. I'm afraid of how he'll react. Afraid he'll be angry with me for keeping the truth from him." Flynn reached over and took her hand, the first time he'd touched her since her return. "He's 5, Abby. He's not going to understand the complexities of adult relationships. All he'll know is that his father wants to be part of his life. That's a good thing." The warmth of his hand around hers was both familiar and new. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow. We could take him on a picnic, somewhere quiet where we can talk." She nodded. "Tomorrow, then." They sat in silence for a while, hands still joined, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. It wasn't the passionate love they'd once shared, but it was something, a tentative bridge across the chasm of years and misunderstandings. The next day dawned clear and warm, perfect for a picnic. Flynn arrived at the hotel mid-morning with a basket packed by Mrs. Baxter and a small pony for Samuel to ride. "It's just a gentle old thing," he assured Abigail when she looked concerned. "I'll lead him the whole way." Samuel was beside himself with excitement at the prospect of riding his own pony. Flynn lifted him into the saddle, showing him how to hold the reins, how to sit properly. "That's it," he encouraged. "You're doing great." They rode out to a spot by the creek, a grassy meadow shaded by cottonwood trees. Flynn spread a blanket while Abigail unpacked the food: cold chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and lemonade. After they'd eaten, Flynn caught Abigail's eye and nodded slightly. It was time. "Samuel," Abigail began, her heart racing, "Mr. Jackson and I have something important to tell you." Samuel looked up from the grasshopper he'd been watching, his expression curious. "What is it, Mama?" Abigail swallowed hard. "It's about your father, your real father." Samuel's eyes widened. "My pa? Yes, darling. You see, before you were born, before we moved to Boston, I lived here in Timber Creek, and your father—" She faltered, looking to Flynn for support. Flynn moved closer, his voice gentle. "Samuel, I'm your father, your pa." Samuel stared at him, uncomprehending for a moment. Then his gaze moved from Flynn to Abigail and back again. "You're my pa," he repeated. Flynn nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Yes, son, I am." Samuel was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Then, in a small voice, he asked, "Why weren't you with us in Boston? Didn't you want to be my pa?" The question hit Flynn like a physical blow. "Oh, Samuel," he said, his voice breaking. "I would have given anything to be with you, but I didn't know about you. I didn't know you existed until your mama brought you back to Timber Creek." Samuel turned to Abigail, confusion and hurt in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell him about me, Mama?" Abigail took a deep breath. "It's complicated, sweetheart. I made a mistake. I was young and afraid, and I thought it would be better if we stayed in Boston. But I was wrong. Your pa deserved to know about you, and you deserved to know your pa." Samuel seemed to consider this. Then he asked Flynn, "If you'd known about me, would you have come to Boston?" "In a heartbeat," Flynn said without hesitation. "I would have walked there if I had to." Something in Samuel's expression cleared. He stood up from the blanket and walked slowly to Flynn, studying his face with an intensity that belied his years. Flynn remained perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Then, with the simple acceptance that only a child can offer, Samuel climbed into Flynn's lap and wrapped his arms around his neck. "I always wanted a pa," he whispered. Flynn broke down then, clutching his son to his chest, tears streaming down his face. "I've always wanted you, son," he managed to say. "Always." Abigail watched through her own tears as father and son embraced for the first time. Despite all the mistakes, all the lost years, somehow they had found their way here to this moment of healing and truth. Eventually, Samuel pulled back to look at Flynn's face. With a child's practicality, he asked, "Can I call you Pa now instead of Mr. Jackson?" Flynn's smile was radiant through his tears. "I would like that very much." "Pa," Samuel tried the word out. "My Pa." Then he turned to Abigail. "Mama, does this mean we're going to live here with Pa?" Abigail caught Flynn's gaze over Samuel's head. "We have our own house in town, sweetheart." "But we'll see your Pa very often." "Every day," Flynn promised. "And you can stay at the ranch whenever you want." This seemed to satisfy Samuel, who soon went back to exploring the meadow, occasionally calling out, "Pa, look at this," or "Pa, come see," each time making Flynn's eyes grow suspiciously bright. While Samuel played, Flynn moved to sit beside Abigail on the blanket. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for bringing him back, for giving me the chance to know my son." "I should have done it years ago," Abigail said. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find the courage." Flynn took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We can't change the past, Abby, but we can decide what happens now, what happens next." "And what do you want to happen next?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. Flynn looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing past all the years and pain to the girl he'd once loved. "I want us to try again," he said simply. "Not just for Samuel's sake, but for ours. I never stopped loving you, Abby, not really." Abigail's breath caught. "Even after everything I did." "Even then. I was angry, hurt, confused, but underneath it all I still loved you." He paused. "The question is, can you forgive me for letting you go, for not coming after you?" "There's nothing to forgive," Abigail said. "We were both young, both stubborn. And maybe we needed those years apart to grow into the people we are now, people who might be better suited to build a life together." Flynn lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Is that a yes, then? You'll give us another chance?" Abigail smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Yes, Flynn, I'll give us another chance." From across the meadow, Samuel called out again, "Pa, Mama, come quick, I found a frog." They rose together, hand in hand, and went to join their son. As they walked, Abigail thought about the long journey that had brought them to this point, the pain and separation, the lost years, the secrets and misunderstandings. But looking at Flynn and Samuel together, she knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult, led exactly where they were meant to. Over the summer months, a new rhythm developed. Abigail and Samuel settled into their house in town, and Flynn was a constant presence in their lives. He took Samuel riding, taught him about the ranch, read to him at bedtime. The bond between father and son grew stronger with each passing day. Abigail and Flynn took things more slowly, rebuilding their relationship one conversation, one shared moment at a time. They talked about the years they'd spent apart, about their hopes and fears for the future. Some conversations were difficult, opening old wounds that needed to heal properly this time. But there were joyful moments too, riding together at sunset, dancing at the town's 4th of July celebration, quiet evenings on the porch after Samuel had gone to bed. By the time the school term started in September, Abigail had found her place in Timber Creek once more. Her students adored her, and she discovered a genuine talent for teaching. Samuel thrived as well, making friends and soaking up knowledge like a sponge. On a crisp October evening, as the aspen trees turned gold against the mountains, Flynn invited Abigail for a ride, just the two of them. Samuel stayed with Mrs. Baxter, who had become something of a grandmother figure to him. Flynn led them to a ridge overlooking the valley, where the first time he'd shown Abigail the land that would become his ranch. They dismounted, and Flynn spread a blanket on the ground. "I remember this place," Abigail said softly. "You brought me here right after you bought the land." Flynn nodded. I told you all my dreams for the ranch that day. And I told you mine for us, Abigail remembered. A home, children, a life built together. We almost lost those dreams, Flynn said, taking her hands in his. But I think we've been given a second chance. And I don't want to waste it. To Abigail's surprise, he knelt before her, still holding her hands. Abigail Rawlins, I've loved you since we were children. I want to build that life with you and Samuel and maybe more children someday. Will you marry me? Tears of joy filled Abigail's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Flynn slid a ring onto her finger, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the last rays of the setting sun. It was my mother's, he explained. She told me to save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with. Abigail threw her arms around him, and they stayed that way for a long time, holding each other as the stars began to appear above them. They were married in November, a small ceremony in the town church with Samuel standing proudly at his father's side. That evening they brought Samuel to the ranch, his new home. I have something to show you, Flynn said, leading them to the room he'd prepared for Samuel, but it had changed since they'd last seen it. Now there were 2 small beds, not one. Why are there 2 beds, Pa? Samuel asked, puzzled. Flynn and Abigail exchanged a smile. Because, Abigail said, placing a hand on her still flat stomach, in about 7 months you're going to have a little brother or sister. Samuel's eyes grew round. Really? I'm going to be a big brother. Really, Flynn confirmed, lifting Samuel into his arms. What do you think about that? Samuel considered the question with his usual seriousness. I think, he said finally, that we're going to need a bigger swing. Flynn laughed, the sound of pure happiness. I think you're right, son. And we'll build it together. As they stood there, the 3 of them, soon to be 4, Abigail thought about all the twists and turns that had led them to this moment. The young lovers they had been, the mistakes they'd made, the years apart. But somehow, against all odds, they had found their way back to each other. And this time, their love was stronger, deeper, tempered by experience and gratitude for this second chance. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering Timber Creek in a blanket of white. But inside the ranch house, all was warmth and light and love, a family reunited, a future full of promise, and a love story that, after many years and many miles, had finally found its way home.